This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, shall we get underway? It's a pleasure to be here with you at Ora this evening. And I once saw a book called In the Footsteps of the Fathers. Well, for me, this is in the footsteps of the daughters, because my daughter Yocheved taught here at Hasmonean not that long ago, and she did so to great satisfaction, certainly to her satisfaction, although it had its trying moments as well, and I think the satisfaction of her charges as well. So, Elisheva, you can tell Yocheved I'm following her footsteps. Whether I'll be as popular as Yocheved was remains to be seen. But anyway, kol hakavod to you for coming here tonight. Besides the fact that other things are happening and maybe there are other places you have thought you might otherwise go to, but quite aside from that, the option of talking to friends, sending text messages ad infinitum, and all the other options that are available and beckoning, and instead putting it to come aside to come to a shir, kol hakavod to you. Our subject tonight is Bilam's blind spot, lessons from a degenerate prophet. I'd like to look at the opening passage in this week's parasha, which is a fascinating one of my favorite parashas. And we are introduced to the evil genius of Bilam. But Bilam does not give his name to the parsha. It's one of those kind of trick questions. You ask who is the main actor in Parshas Balak. Well, it's not Balak. Balak is the facilitator. But the main personality, and of course we don't admire him, we execrate him, but we learn from him as well, is Bilam. So it says, Vayar Balak ben Sipor es kol asher asa Yisrael le'emori. Balak, the son of Tzipor, saw all that the Jewish people had done to the Emori. Vayagar Moav mipnei ha'am ma'od ki ravhu. Vayakatz Moav mipnei bnei Yisrael. Now this pasuk is the pasuk that tells us, sets the stage for the drama to follow, sets the stage for the commissioning of Bilam to come and curse the Jewish people. And of course, Bilam, to his own great dismay, finds that he's unsuccessful in his efforts, in his ardent efforts to curse the Jewish people, and instead he blesses them repeatedly. But the background to it is what the Torah gives us here. When the Torah says, Vayagar Moav mipnei ha'am, that Moav was afraid. Here it's rendered, Moav was very frightened. Like we have the pasuk, Lo saguru mipnei ish. Do not be afraid of any man. So the word vayagar means to be afraid. But then the Torah tells us immediately something similar but not identical. Vayagar Moav mipnei ha'am. Moav was afraid because of the people, ha'am, ma'od, greatly, ki ravhu, because he is numerous, vayakatz Moav mipnei bnei Yisrael. Now what does vayakatz mean? Vayakatz. They were disgusted. That's right. That's right. It says, you're right here, and Moav was disgusted in the face of the children of Israel. Vayakatz. Rivka said, Katzti b'chayai mipnei benos ches. I'm disgusted with life. If Yaakov marries one of these Hittite women, lama li chayim, it would be disastrous. She says, Katzti b'chayai. So Vayakatz Moav means that he was like appalled. Something was not just a note of fear, but a note of repulsion, of something which was very upsetting to him. Vayakatz Moav mipnei bnei Yisrael. Now, in addition to the variation, to the distinction between Vayagar, which means he was afraid, and Vayakatz, which means he was disgusted, what other difference do you see between the first part and the second part of the pasuk? Vayagar Moav mipnei ha'am. He was afraid of the people, ha'am. And the second part, Vayakatz Moav mipnei bnei Yisrael. Now you tell me, what is the difference in the connotation between ha'am and bnei Yisrael? Of course, both references refer to the Jewish people. But what is the connotation of ha'am as opposed to bnei Yisrael? What would you say? And since Elisheva is here, I'm going to ask Elisheva. She already has long and occasionally stressful experience of answering my questions in my shirim. Am
is just the regular people.
Just the regular people. Like that famous turn of phrase which we've all heard, hopefully has never been applied to anyone here. Am ha'aretz. What's an am ha'aretz? An ignoramus. An am ha'aretz is a simple person, a plain person. Am ha'aretz is, it's an expression, literally means the people of the land. It means the rank and file, the proletariat, the plebeians, if you remember your Roman history. So, ha'am alludes to the masses of the Jewish people. Bnei Yisrael, what is the meaning of Bnei Yisrael? That every person here certainly knows. The children of Israel. That means that is a reference to the greatness of our nation. Ha'am means just the masses of the people. And the Torah even hints to what I'm saying, because it says Kiravhu, they were numerous. It doesn't say that they were necessarily distinctive in other respects, but they were numerous. So he was afraid because they were numerous. Of course, the context is that he saw what they had done, the Emori. What did they do to the Emori? Well, they defeated them in battle. They vanquished them. So therefore, Moab is afraid. So he's afraid of the people because they were numerous, but the second half of the pasuk is more subtle, and that we've already seen it. Vayakatz Moab mipnei bnei Yisrael. He was disgusted, he was appalled, he was somehow revolted with Bnei Yisrael. And I would suggest that the first part of the pasuk means fear of military defeat. He's afraid because the Jewish people are numerous. So he's afraid of the military encounter. The second part is an ideological revulsion because of what Bnei Yisrael represent. Bnei Yisrael represents belief in one God. Bnei Yisrael represents probity, represents self-restraint, represents all of the things which these debaucherous and degenerate nations, of course, were uncomfortable with. And it was a threat to them. And it was a condemnation of their value system. So therefore, he was afraid of the military significance of this nation, who were so numerous. And also he was troubled, he was repulsed by the ideological difference, which, of course, showed him up in a negative light. But he's got a plan. What is his plan? Of course, you know the plan. What is his plan? What's he going to do? He's going to hire his own degenerate prophet to beat the Jewish people, so to speak, at their own game. Because he realizes militarily, if Emori has fallen, Sichon and Og were defeated in last week's Parashat already, then what hope does he have? So he's got a devious plan, and he's going to hire, as we know, Bilam. Okay, let's go on. Vayomer Moab el Ziknei Midian. Now, by the way, what does the Torah tell us so far about Balak ben Zippor? That's a slightly trick question because it doesn't tell us anything about his role or about his title. It does not tell us yet that he's a melech. It just says, Vayar Balak ben Zippor. But the next pasuk, pasuk Dalid, Vayomer Moab. Do you have source material, by the way? So we've got it over here. Please. Vayomer Moab el Zignei Midian ata yelachachu hakahal eskol svivosin kelchoch hashor zyerak hasadeh. He says Moab turns to Ziknei Midian, the elders of Midian, and he says, well, this nation is going to consume everything around us, and we're at risk. We're under threat. And then the Torah says, Balak ben Zippor melech leMoab be'es hahi. That Balak ben Zippor became the king at that time. So Rashi says that they just elected him king, at that time in order to sort of meet the challenge, because of the national emergency, so they appointed him to be the king. Rashi also says that we find that normally Midian and Moab are quarreling, they're rivals, they may be enemies, but now they were united because of a common enemy, which again is an insight into, I suppose, geopolitics, which perhaps we can relate to. But Rabbeinu Bechaya, I like to say my friend Rabbeinu Bechaya, because I have a great fondness for that particular parish. I'm sure you've heard of Rabbeinu Bechaya. Rabbeinu Bechaya was a Talmid of Ramban. So Ramban, you've definitely heard all about. Ramban was the great Spanish commentator, Torah commentator. Next to Rashi, probably the most esteemed and the most influential parish of any of the great Mefarshim was Ramban. And Rabbeinu Bechaya was a Talmid of the Talmidim of Ramban. He was a Talmid of the Rashba. And his style is similar to Ramban, but a little bit more accessible. He writes at a little bit greater length, and I found personally great inspiration and great insight in the writings of Rabbeinu Bechaya. So that's my advertisement for tonight. So Rabbeinu Bechaya says, Ba'es Hahi, at that time, at first he wasn't called a king. Why was he not identified as the king? Because what does it say about him at first? The first pasuk says that he saw what's going on. The second pasuk says, V'yagar, he was afraid. Says Rabbeinu Bechaya, if he's afraid, he's no king. But now, he's got a plan. So if he's got a plan, if he's got a response to the crisis, so therefore it says, he was a melech, Balak ben Sipar, melech leMoab, now he's become the king. Now he's acting as a king. Because he's got a plan. What's his plan? Vaishlach malachim el Bilam ben Ba'or Pesora. So he sent messengers to Bilam ben Ba'or Pesora. Now, Pesora seems to be a place, but the Mefarshim interpret it in a number of different ways. One possibility is the word Petora actually means a table, and it hints to his profession. It's in Talmudic language is called a shulchani. A shulchani, that's why it's associated with a table. Do you know what a shulchani did? What was that profession? Carpenter? That's a good guess. That's not right. It's a good guess, though. I'll give you a hint. It was a very profitable business. Now, it's usually translated in English as a money changer. A shulchani is a money changer. But we would say today a banker, which can be very profitable. Can also bring one to great public ignominy, as we've seen. But it is associated with someone who is good with money, who is greedy, and who exchanges money. That's called a money changer. But in those days, it was, as I said, it was more than just giving someone breaking a 50-pound note and giving him 5 tens. Obviously, there was more to it than that. It was what we would call today a currency trader, but it was more than that as well. It was someone who's in the financial services. But there's a suggestion that he was greedy. And the Torah certainly gives us many further indications of that. So that's why we sent him to Pesora. Rabbeinu Bechaya says something else as well. I wonder if anyone has heard of the Hebrew word pitaron. What is a pitaron? Interpretation. That's exactly it. Excellent. Pitaron is interpretation or a solution. It's with a taf, not with a tet, not patur, with a tes, but pitaron, liftar, is to solve or to interpret, like to interpret a dream. And that hints to his role as a seer, as a prophet, as one who can see the future, or who can, as we'll see in a little while, who can presume to understand the mind of God, which to a certain degree he could, because he was a prophet. And again, we'll see more about that shortly. So the word Petora may allude to his capacity, to his talent as one who can interpret dreams or one who can foretell the future as a result. But Rashi says it hints to his role as a money changer, which in turn reflects his greed and his obsession with money. Okay, so they send, actually I've stopped in the middle of the pasuk, Vaishlach malachim el Bilam ben Ba'or Pesora, asher al hanahar eretz b'nei amo, likro lo, to summon him lemor, behold, the nation has come from Mitzrayim, and they've covered the land, and they're so numerous. I'm reading Pasuk Vav. V'ata, and now, l'chana arali es ha'am hazeh, ki atzumhu mimeni. Arali means curse for me this people, because he is too numerous for me. Now, the next words in the Pasuk reveal an insight into the nature of blessings, and more so the nature of curses. Bilam, of course, is more interested in curses than in blessings. So let's look closely at the rest of this pasuk. I'm sorry for stopping in the middle. I'm just confusing things a bit. He says, let's go back to the beginning of pasuk Vav. V'ata lechana arali asamazeh. Come and curse, please, for me this nation. Ki atzumhu mimeni, because he is more powerful than I. Ulai uchal nakebo. Perhaps I will be able to strike him meaning the Jewish people. Va'agashenu min haaretz, and I will banish him from the land, meaning I'll prevail over him. I'll strike him a grievous blow with your help of cursing him. Va'agashenu min haaretz. Ki yada'ati, because I know. Eis asher tevarech mevorach, v'asher ta'or you are. I know that the one whom you bless is blessed, and the one whom you curse is cursed. This is a great pasuk. Balak is doing a few things here. The first thing he's doing is he is flattering Bilam. And he's saying, I know that the one who you curse is cursed, the one who you bless is blessed, the one who you curse is cursed. Like my father, Zichron Levracha, used to say to his students, my father was a university professor for 47 years. So he used to tell his students, flattery will get you nowhere, but keep trying. So Balak is flattering Bilam, and he says, I know that you've got great power, the one who you bless is blessed, the one who you curse is cursed. I've got to tell you, just parenthetically, before we get to the further study of this pasuk, that one of the commentators, I think it's Sforno, asks a very good question. If it really is true that Bilam has the power to bless and to curse, and the one whom he blesses gets the blessing and benefits from it, and the one whom he curses suffers the consequences, the malediction will come true and he'll suffer. So if that's the case, then why doesn't Balak ask Bilam to bless him and his nation? Bless us with prosperity, bless us with peace, bless us that we should not be threatened or imperiled by this nation of Israel that has come from Mitzrayim, who, by the way, had no design on Moab in any case. They had no intention of conquering Moab, waging war with Moab. That wasn't on their agenda, it wasn't on their itinerary. So he doesn't need to curse the Jewish people. He could just ask Bilam to give him a blessing. So the interesting thing is that actually we don't find anywhere that Bilam has the ability to bless. There's no indication in his character that he has the gift of blessing. He only has the gift of cursing. He only has the inclination to curse. And the fact that Balak said, come and curse these people, implies, or as I said, throws up the question, if Bilam is capable of blessing, then why doesn't Balak ask Bilam for a blessing? I mean, lahavdil, if you have something on your mind, something troubling you, or something, a perilous situation that you're facing, or something that you desire, that you want to come to pass, so you might go to a tzaddik and ask for a bracha. The tzaddik might tell you that you've got to take certain steps to achieve your goal, but he could give you a bracha. Is it sensible to go to the tzaddik and say, please curse my rival, I want to get a job, so curse all the other people who are going for the job, that they should lose out and I should get it. I mean, that's not the right way. If you want something, ask for a blessing. So why didn't Balak ask Bilam for a blessing? The answer is that Bilam actually has no ability to bless. In reality, Bilam doesn't do blessings. Bilam is only a force for despair, for suffering, for misfortune. The only thing is, if he directs that koach of cursing to my enemy, so then I benefit. So why then did he say to him, oh, I know that you can bless, whoever you bless is blessed? And the answer, which to me is a keen insight, but maybe you would say, well, it's quite obvious. The answer is that he wanted to flatter Bilam. He didn't want Bilam to know or to think or to realize that in fact he is only a force for evil. He is only a malevolent force. So therefore Balak knew that Bilam doesn't do blessings. Because if he could have done a blessing, he would have asked for a blessing. He knew that he could only do curses. But nevertheless, he said to him, he spoke to him, he addressed him in a way as if to flatter him, as if to say, oh, I know that you've got such wonderful abilities, you can give blessings, you can dispense curses, you the man, as we say. So he was just playing up to his ego. And of course, Bilam was eating it up. And this is clear from what follows, that Bilam asks Hashem, Balak has sent people to summon me, can I go? And Hashem says, no, don't go. So what happened? Do you remember how the story unfolds? What happened next?
He ignores him.
Not immediately. You're right, he does, but he sends them home first, and Balak says, oh, I guess that I didn't honor him enough. So he sends more distinguished dignitaries and offers him more money and more profit, more esteem and more prestige and more glory. And by then, it's too much for Bilam to resist. So he, so to speak, convinces himself that Hashem will let him go. Yeah?
Does Bilam get anything for sending him back then, as a reward? Is that also taking self-control, you know?
That's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. It takes us to the enigma of Bilam. The question, did everyone hear the question? The question was, does Bilam deserve, or does he get, do we find that he is praised, he gets some reward for, at least initially, telling the emissaries, no, I can't do it, I'm not going to do it, Hashem won't let me do it, and he sends them home empty-handed. And he therefore loses out on the profit. So even though he succumbs the second time, but is he rewarded? And the reason I say it takes us to the heart of the enigma, the mystery of Bilam, is that he is a prophet. He communicates with Hashem. Hashem communicates with him. He is he has the gift, he has the ability to actually anticipate the will of God. And the intent, and as we'll see, eventually, he actually, to a degree, sadly, triumphs and succeeds in his objective, as we'll see towards the end of our shir tonight. And yet he is degenerate, and yet he is self-serving, he's greedy, and all of these things. So I think that Bilam at first sent them home because he was realistic, and he recognized that Hashem won't let him go. And if he does go, his mission is doomed. And therefore, I don't think it was necessarily an act of obedience or loyalty or recognition that he has no business trying to curse Klal Yisrael. It was just that he realized to his frustration that it's not going to work. In fact, some say that Bilam was even more guileful, and it was all a negotiating tactic. Let's say you have something that another person wants to buy, and you know he wants it very much, and he'll pay you a lot of money for it. So he comes and says, will you sell this piece of art, or let's say you've got a valuable sefer, or something like that, and of course you want to get the top price for it. So he offers you a lot of money, but you think, well, you know what, I can get even more money for it. I think he'll pay me more. So you say, no, forget it, it's not for sale, I like it too much, I've had it for so many years, forget it, it's not for sale. So he comes back the next day and he offers you a lot more money. So it could be that Bilam was actually trying to drive up the price by saying, no, Hashem won't let me go with you guys because you're not prestigious enough. So Balak therefore responded by sending higher ranking officials and offering him even more money. So I don't think Bilam gets too much credit at that point. But it's a very good question. And as I said, we do find that he communicates with Hashem. And rather than saying, fantastic, let's go, we're taking the first train out, he doesn't say that. He says, spend the night, I'll see what Hashem tells me. So in that sense, he is acknowledging his subservience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it was all, of course, in self-interest. And the proof is that the second time, he succumbs. He's so desperate to go that he goes even though Hashem has warned him that his efforts will be for naught. I want to look again at this pasuk, though, that we started to study, and to consider the slight disparity, the slight nuance of difference between the words ulai uchal nakebo. What does ulai mean? Perhaps. But then, immediately after that, he says, ki yadati, because I know, is a shetavarech mevarach, ta'or you are. Because I know, whoever you bless is blessed, whoever you curse is cursed. So, I wouldn't say that there's a contradiction. That would be wrong to try to describe it in that way. But there is a nuance of difference. Ulai means perhaps, which means ulai kain, ulai lo. Maybe yes, and maybe no. But the next words, ki yadati, because I know that who you bless is blessed, who you curse is cursed, implies that it's definitive, it's absolute. He's got the power. He's got the power to bless and to curse. So why is it that at first he says, ulai, yachol lihiyot, perhaps I will be able, with your help, I'll be able to strike him. And this takes us to the insight that we will shortly look at more closely, namely the question of whether the ability of Bilam to curse, or whether the ability of anyone to curse is absolute, or it is limited, if it is conditional. We will see that although he does have a potent ability to curse, but it is conditional on the vulnerability of his victim. The vulnerability of his victim. The first instance of a curse that we find in the Torah is the curse that was given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Adam, to Chava, and to the Nachash, to the serpent. The serpent because he brought about their downfall, but Adam and Eve were cursed as well. The serpent was unable to bring any harm to Chava unless there was a vulnerability. Klal Yisrael, if they are worthy, then they are impervious to the efforts of Bilam to curse them. And that is why Bilam repeatedly tried from this perspective, from another perspective, and he tried to curse them repeatedly from different angles, and symbolically he was looking for, we would say, if you've ever been to the Tower of London or other places where they have on display the coat of armor that was used in medieval times, he was looking for a chink in the armor. Symbolically, he was looking for some vulnerability. He was looking for some way or some deficiency, some defect in the worthiness of Klal Yisrael. And if so, that's an opportunity for his curse to take hold. And we'll soon see how that will unfold. So that's why Balak said, Ulai, maybe, but I can't be sure. Because even though you have a potent ability to curse, and he said a potent ability to bless, although as we've suggested that was probably just flattery, but even so, your ability to curse is conditional on the vulnerability of your victim. Okay, that's as far as I like to go right now in looking at the personalities of these people, Balak and Bilam, and of course Bilam is going to become the central personality in the rest of the parsha. But let's consider a little bit more, looking at the next source on the page in this slightly smaller print there, about the identity of Bilam and the greatness of Bilam, or I should say maybe the great potential of Bilam. And here we have a passage which I'm sure is familiar to us all because it's very well known. I've taken it from the Yalkut Shimoni, which is a Midrashic collection, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but it's found in other Midrashic sources as well. And as I said, the statement itself, probably is familiar to every person here. Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. This is nearly the last pasuk in the Torah. Maybe the very last pasuk, can't remember. The Torah ends, Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. No other prophet arose in Israel as Moshe. So here the Medrash says the remarkable and well-known words, B'Yisrael lo kam. In the Jewish people, lo kam, no one ever arose as great as Moshe. B'umos ha'olam kam. But among the nations of the world, there did arise a prophet who was the counterpart to Moshe. I would not use the word equal of Moshe, because it's very problematic to say that he was actually the equal of Moshe, but he was the counterpart to Moshe. Just as Moshe was distinguished among all the great prophets of Israel, he was in a league of his own, so Umas Olam also had a great prophet who was in a league of his own. And this, of course, is Bilam. Zeh Bilam ben Ba'ar. But the remarkable thing is that Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, achieved his greatness through self-perfection, and Bilam achieved his greatness, but it did not elevate him, it did not refine him at all, as we'll see in a moment. If you look to the text immediately to the left, it's only 3 little words. It's Goren Sanhedrin, Bilam. So I'm sure you know that Chazal very often interpret the names of personalities in the Torah. Sometimes the Torah itself explains how the name was given or why the name was given. Adam chose his own name, Min Ha'adama, and Chava was given that name because she was. Is there anyone here called Chava? Why? How did she get the name Chava? Aim called Chai. She was the mother of all life. Chava is like Chayim. It's like a variation of it. And other people as well. Yitzchak, we know how he got his name. But most people in the Torah, we don't know how or why their name was given, but Chazal very often interpret the name in all different ways. So Bilam, the Gemara says, below Am. What does that mean, below Am? Without a nation. Without a nation, how can he not have a nation? He's got to have some passport. Is he stateless? No, he's got a nation, but he doesn't have any loyalty to a nation. He's a hired gun, or a hired mouth in his case. He's a complete mercenary. He'll sell himself to the highest bidder. His only loyalty is to himself and to his bank account. That's his only loyalty. Below Am. He's got no nation, he's got no national loyalties or convictions. He'll curse anybody, he'll work for anybody who is ever paying him the top dollar. Below Am. That's the kind of person that he was. So Bilam became a prophet without perhaps without any effort, and certainly without any benefit to his own character. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Mesilas Yesharim, the book Mesilas Yesharim. You know, the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim. Does anyone remember the first chapter, how the book is arranged, the organization of the book? The Ramchal was a very organized man. He was a remarkable, he categorized things in a very excellent way. He was a great Kabbalist. Many of his writings are very difficult to understand, but he was great in organization. He was an optician, by profession. The Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, was an optician. I guess opticians have to have good attention to detail. So he was very organized. So he arranged the book, Mesilas Yesharim, in accordance. Does anybody remember? I'm not going to ask you to say it off by heart, but does anybody remember the theme that runs through Mesilas Yesharim? He bases it chapter by chapter on a certain interesting source in the Talmud.
Okay. It's the movement, I can't remember the beginning, but it's the Chassidus.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly it. The Brisa, I think it's from Pinchas Ben Yair, who says the incremental steps of self-perfection. And to be honest, I can't remember it myself exactly the order, but you've got Zehirus and Zrizus, and you've got Anava, you've got Yiras Chet, humility and fear of sin, and the highest levels you've got Chasidus, which is saintliness, and you've got the level of Ruach HaKodesh. It's actually a handbook on how to become a prophet in 12 easy lessons. Maybe not easy lessons, but it actually is. In all seriousness, it lays out to the viewer, to the reader rather, how and in what way, and maybe in what order a person can and should seek to perfect his character in all those different ways. And the idea is that someone who actually achieves that step by step can even reach the level of Ruach HaKodesh. And yet Bilam somehow catapulted to Ruach HaKodesh without doing any of those things. And as I say, this is the mystery, this is the enigma of Bilam. If you take a look at the next source, so in the Yalkut Shimoni we have the insight, again the well-known identification of Bilam as the counterpart to Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos which tells us that Bilam is the counterpart to someone else as well. And before we look at the Mishnah, probably you already know it, but the last words in the passage that we've been studying so far, the opening passage from the Parsha, what are the last words, which we've already commented on in some detail? Es asher tavarech muvarach v'asher ta'or yu'ar. Is there any biblical personality that those words should remind us of? Abraham. Very good. Excellent. Elisheva has known that for a long time, but she has the advantage of teaching Bereshis to her children as well. She's an absolute expert in it. Anything you want to know, and also if you're Bereshis, you can ask Elisheva. In fact, you can ask Elisheva's students. Yeah. So it says about Abraham that ki avarecha varechecha, that mevarachecha ararecha arum mevarachecha baruch. So Abraham is the one with whom those turns of phrase are associated. And here Balak attributes a similar koach to Bilam. And this is, I'm not saying the only source, but it's one of the hints to what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, which is the last paragraph at the foot of the page. Kol mi sheyesh bo shlosha dvarim halalu hu mitalmidav shel Avraham Avinu. Anyone who has the following three traits, the following three qualities, is a disciple. That is to say, he is emulating the ways of Avraham Avinu. Ushlosha dvarim acherim, and six opposite qualities, whom talmidav shel Bilam harasha. So here the Mishnah expressly juxtaposes, contrasts Avraham and Bilam. And here they are. Avraham has ayin tova, v'ruach nemucha v'nefesh shvala. Mitalmidiv shel Avraham Avinu. However, ayin ra'a, ruach gevoha, nefesh rachava, mitalmidiv shel Bilam. And then it goes on to say what's the difference between them, etc. So someone who has a generous eye, a humble spirit, and a lowly soul, those are qualities associated with Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu has the tuv ayin. He has a good eye. What does that mean, as a good eye? Of course, it doesn't mean he does not need the services of the Ramchal as an optician. It means that he wants to bestow goodness on others. What he sees that another person has some benefit, he says, wonderful, I hope you have more of it. I remember driving once many years ago, I was a teenager, with a friend of mine, and it was a beautiful sunny day. It was possibly 4th of July, for those who know American calendar, and a beautiful sunny day, and we were driving by a park, and there were people having a picnic. And she said, oh, it's such a lovely day for a picnic. I'm so happy for them. They're enjoying a lovely day in the park, a beautiful day for a picnic. It was just spontaneous on her part, and that's the ayin tov. They're complete strangers to her. They weren't Jewish people even, but she was just delighted for them that they're enjoying a wonderful day in the park, such a beautiful day, they're having a picnic. That's ayin tova. And of course it means to give generously to others as well. Whatever I have, I want to share. Bilam is the opposite. He's got an ayin ra, Whatever he sees that someone else has, he hopes he loses it. If his neighbor buys a new, Mercedes, he says, I hope that you smash it, before you have a chance to buy insurance. This is the quality of Bilam, and that's the opposite. It's the counterpart. It's the mirror opposite of Avraham Avinu. This is hinted to actually in the word acherim. The word acherim simply means other. Acher means other. But it's translated here in the English three opposite qualities, because from the context they're not simply different or other qualities, but they're definitely opposite qualities. But acherim hints to something else, which is an expression that you may have heard in seminary or elsewhere, sitra achra. What is the sitra achra? Literally, sitra achra. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Sitra achra. Sitra means sitra achra means the other side. It's like the dark side. It's the side of Ra. It's the side of you could say the Satan, the Malach HaMaves. The sitra achra is the Yetzer Hara. It's the dark forces that exist within the world and within every person. That is what Bilam represents. Bilam, that's why the Mishnah uses the word acherim, shlosha dvarim acherim. It doesn't say vehefeicham, they're opposite, even though that's what it means. But it says dvarim acherim to hint to the idea that Bilam is the sitra achra. As great as Abraham was in chesed, that's how great Bilam was in the opposite, in greed and in self-promotion and self-aggrandizement. This is hinted to as well, because when they start along the way, and Avraham is going to, when Avraham was on his journey, his most fateful journey. What was the most fateful journey? Avraham had a very eventful life. But what was the most fateful journey that Avraham took? Akeres Yitzhak. I think so too. Maybe you could say a different journey, maybe it was more fateful, but I think it's quite clear 10 tests, and that was the most difficult one. So he got to a certain point. Remember, he had his attendants with him, he had Yitzchak with him, and he got to a certain point and he said, Shvu lachem poim hachamor. He said to his attendants, you stay here with the chamor, v'ani v'hanar nelchad ko. And the lad and I, we'll go a bit further up. He left his chamor behind. Bilam, his name was Bilam ben Ba'or. Ba'or, that's his father's name, but the Medrash interprets the Gemara really. I didn't put it here. I didn't think it was right to put in print. The Gemara puts it in print, but I didn't put it in print. He says, Ba'al Ba'iro. He had, shall we say, an overly close association with his animal. Avraham was riding a chamor. Bilam was riding an ason. Ason is a female chamor, a female ass. And the Gemara says that Bilam had a degenerate, intimate relationship with his animal. Ba'al be'iro. Be'ir is an animal, like a livestock. So Bilam is degenerate. Bilam is greedy. Avraham, when he has his highest spiritual encounter, he leaves the chamor behind. He goes on foot with Yitzchak to Har HaMoriah. Bilam, of course, it's the ass of Bilam which has the prophecy. It's the animal starts to talk to him. Remember, he goes along the way, and the Satan is preventing him, and the animal presses his leg against the wall. We don't have time to go into all the symbolism of it. So Avraham, when he had his greatest spiritual experience, he left his chamor behind. Bilam, not only did he not leave it behind, but it was the animal that had the experience, that saw the prophecies, that saw the vision of the Malach. So Bilam emerges as this most perplexing and in a way troubling enigma. Someone who in his own way is as great as Moshe. Someone who in his own way is the opposite of Avraham Avinu. And it makes us wonder, it makes us almost worry. How can it be that a person can achieve such greatness in the sense of spiritual insight and capacity and potency? Or we would say maybe intellectual achievement, and yet be so degenerate, be so self-interested. And I think that this is a keen and perhaps a troubling insight into human nature and into the human capacity. So I'd just like to spend the last minutes, if you turn the page over, and consider the aftermath of the mission of Bilam. By which I mean that Bilam was unsuccessful in cursing the Jewish people, and instead, to his own profound frustration, he expressed the most sublime and the most beautiful, eloquent, memorable blessings that have been bestowed on the Jewish people. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkanosecha Yisrael, and many others that are in the Parashat. And he was frustrated, and in the end, Balak said, "You've wasted my time, and you've wasted your own time." And Bilam said, "Well, look, I told you it at the beginning." No doubt he was very disappointed, but he said, "I told you from the start. I can only say, I can only articulate, I can only express the words that God puts into my mouth." But at the very end of the parasha, he says, "You know what? I'll give you some advice. I'll tell you what's going to happen in the future." And Bilam goes on his way, goes home, and Balak goes home. But at the very end of the parsha, I'm sure you recall, the Torah describes how the Moabite women, Midianite women, came and seduced the Jewish people, the men. And actually, those efforts were wickedly successful. Let's take a look at what Rashi says. Actually, we'll start at the very top of the page. We'll go through very quickly. Ma kov lo kabo el, ma izom lo za'am anunoi. He says, how can I curse when God has not cursed? How can I anger when God has not been angry? Now this hints to what we said before, that Bilam realizes that his ability to curse is very potent, but it has a limitation. The limitation is that he has to be able to find some vulnerability in his victim. The victim has to be susceptible to the curse in some way. And that's why he says, how can I curse when God has not cursed? And how can I invoke divine anger when Hashem is not angry? Now that hints to his strategy. He wants to find a way to make God angry. So he says, after all of the efforts to curse have been proven to be futile and forlorn, he says, "Va'ata hinini holech lamei," I'm going home. "Lecha yatzecha," I'll give you some advice. "Asher yaseh ha'am hazeh la'amcha ba'achris hayamim." I'll give you some advice. So he foretells a prophecy of the future. Very good. But what's about the advice? What advice did he give him? So the Torah doesn't tell us here what the advice is, but later on, the Torah reveals what was the advice of Bilam, and it's hinted to right here. Take a look at Rashi. Lacha yatzecha, ma lacha la'asos, I will give you some advice. The problem that we've had is that I cannot curse them because Hashem won't curse them. And the reason he won't curse them is because they're righteous, they are worthy. If they're worthy, they're not susceptible to any kind of curse, and there's no divine anger. So that's why the whole thing has been a futile exercise. But you know what? I've got a piece of shrewd advice, cunning advice, nefarious advice. And that is, if you entice the Jewish people to sin, then you won't even need me to curse them. Hashem himself will curse them, because they will be punished for their transgression. This is exactly what Rashi says. Take a look. Umahi ha'etza, what was the advice? Eloheihem shel elu sone zimahu. The God of these Israelites hates promiscuity. As the Gemara says in Chelek, and that's a certain chapter in Sanhedrin. Teda shebilam hesi eitza zo. You know for sure that he gave them this advice. Lachshilam bezima, to bring about their downfall through promiscuity, through sending out the Midianite women to entice the Jewish people, the Jewish men. Shaharei Ne'emar, it says later on, Hein heina hayu livnei Yisrael bidvar Bilam. Later on, the Torah says about the Midianite women that they were the ones who were responsible for the downfall of the Jewish people, bidvar Bilam, at the suggestion of the word of Bilam. So later on, the Torah makes it quite clear that it was his advice, although it's not said explicitly here. Now, I want to just conclude with the passage you see towards the bottom of this page, which is taken from the book Michtav Me'Eliyahu. Michtav Me'Eliyahu is a fantastic sefer. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. And the reason you're familiar with it is that they love to teach it in the seminaries. And the reason they love to teach in the seminaries, no doubt for its own merit, I'm sure that, that reason alone is adequate explanation. But Rav Dessler wrote Michtav Me'Eliyahu. Actually, most of it were lectures that he gave orally that were transcribed by his disciples and written down, most of them only later on, in some cases decades after his death. But Rabbi Dessler lived in Gateshead, and he inspired the founding of the Gateshead Seminary. And Rabbi Mordechai Miller, Zichron Livracha, was a close talmid of Rav Dessler. And the graduates of that seminary were among the founders of so many other seminaries. And the men who taught in that seminary taught in other seminaries. And the influence of Rav Dessler, therefore, has spread very much through Klal Yisrael, through the seminaries, through the women. That's not to say that it's, so to speak, women's Torah. I mean, if you consider that pejorative, which I don't think it necessarily is, but that's not what I mean to say. But it's very popular with in the seminaries and in yeshivas as well. And I mean, I never went to seminary. I also learned Michtav Me'Eliyahu. So there you have it. But this is a characteristic passage of the brilliance of Rav Dessler. So we're not going to go through all of it. I know the time is a bit late already. We should be wrapping up. But Rav Dessler, so perhaps you can learn it on your own at your own leisure. Rav Dessler explains as follows. There are two divine sort of approaches, or I don't want to say it's a style, it's not quite the right turn of phrase. There are two paradigms of how Hashem deals with the world. I'm referring to the qualities of chesed and gvura. Now those are divine qualities, but of course those are human qualities as well. Chesed means kindness, compassion, beneficence. It is associated with prosperity, with plenty, with comfort and wealth and an environment where everyone is getting along and everything is great. That's chesed. Gevura can be the opposite. Gevura means with maybe judgment. Gevura is associated with din, with holding people to account. When the quality of gevura is paramount, then, so to speak, we don't have necessarily bountiful harvests, and we don't have great prosperity. It's all in accordance with justice, in accordance with what a person achieves and what a person deserves. Those are the two qualities. So he says, let's take a look at the first paragraph. The two qualities. And of course, it goes without saying, those are, as I mentioned, paradigms. Generally, there's an admixture. And we'll soon see, which is my point here tonight, at the conclusion of our shiur, the danger when there's a lack of balance between the two, when they're knocked out of kilter. Usually there is a balance, chesed and din. B'makom shegvura shegoveres midas hadin, when there's a lot of midas hadin around, v'anashim anim u're'evim, people are hungry and people are poor, because Hashem is, so to speak, treating the world with strict justice, strict judgment. If people are deserving, then they get it, and if they're not deserving, then they lose out. And if a person does an aveira, a person says something that she shouldn't say, or a person falls short of responsibilities, ben adam l'makom, ben adam l'chaveiro, so there's punishment that ensues. That's called din. And that kind of environment is not a pleasant time. It may be a time of poverty. It may be a time of famine. It may be a time of unemployment, or a time when people are struggling to get by. Chesed is the opposite. Chesed, there's lots of money around, and people can do chesed because if I've got lots of money, then it's easier for me to give money. Of course, some people have money, they still don't give. But there may be people who would like to give, but they don't have. But when the time of chesed, then everyone, people are prosperous, and therefore they can give tzedakah to help those who are in need. That's great. But there is a downside to it. And here's where we get to Bilam. Bilam said, how can I curse when God has not cursed? So the Gemara says about Bilam, the pasuk says, Yodeya das Elyo, that Bilam knew the mind of God. What did it mean he knew the mind of God? So the Gemara says, he knew when God gets angry. The Gemara says that Hashem gets angry every day. The pasuk tells us, Ki rega ba'apo chayim birtzono. Rega ba'apo. What does that mean? Ki rega ba'apo. What is af? Anger. Charon af is anger. Rega be'apo. A rega is a moment, an instant. So the Gemara in Brachos actually quantifies how long is a rega. It's just a moment. Just a moment. So the Gemara, Hashem gets angry every day. Hashem gets angry every day for a rega. For a moment. Rav Dessler explains that that moment of anger actually is necessary. In the following way. Bilam was clever and devious. And Bilam thought, you know what? I am going to exploit the moment when God is angry. At the moment, every day, when Hashem is angry, he gets angry every day, the Gemara says, for a rega, for a moment. I'm going to anticipate when that moment is, and when it comes, I'm going to curse the Jewish people in that moment. The Gemara says, what can you say in a moment? The Gemara says, kala'im. One word, kala'im. Destroy them. Kala'im. So Bilam waited for that moment, and he was going to say kala'im, and then he would exploit the moment of divine anger. What did Hashem do? He didn't get angry. He said, Bilam is trying to curse my children, so I'm not going to get angry. I'm going to depart from my usual procedure. I'm not going to get angry at all this day. So therefore, Bilam had no chance to curse the Jewish people. But we pay the price. If there's no anger, then what happens? The chesed and din equilibrium is knocked out of kilter. There's no din. There's no anger even for a moment. Chesed is abundant. Abundant chesed, my friends, has a downside to it. The downside to it is promiscuity. Chesed, if you give and you love and you give without any restrictions, without any limitations, then you give of your others and you give to others and you give of yourself. Like I once saw a sign that says, love your neighbor, but don't get caught. Chesed, if it's excessive, if it's untrammeled, it can lead to promiscuity. And that's exactly what happened. Bilam said to Balak, I'm going to give you some advice. Hashem has made it impossible for me to curse them because they are righteous. The Jewish people are worthy. And even the moment of anger, that Hashem gets angry every day for a moment, just as a matter of policy, He has changed His policy just to thwart me and my plans. But you know what? I'm going to exploit the fact that He didn't get angry. The excessive chesed means that I'm going to exploit the excessive chesed that's around. And He exploited it by sending the Midianite women to seduce the Jewish men. They were in the chesed mode, and there was so much happiness around, and so much joy, and all of that, and therefore they were susceptible to the hate of the promiscuity with the Midianite women. And that's why the solution, what was the tikkun? What was it that brought about an end to the plague and to the terrible debauchery and promiscuity with all the Midianite beauties? What brought an end to it? Pinchas. Pinchas carried out an act of vigilante justice. Don't try it at home. But that's what he did. And that was gevura, that was a manifestation of din, which introduced the painful corrective to the excessive chesed. So, just to summarize, we see that Bilam First, I hope we've learned a few useful, I don't mean to say that, a few fascinating and holy psukim of the Torah. I think we've understood. I hope we've understood it. We've looked at it closely. We've paid attention to the nuances. We've gained an insight into the nature of Bilam, into the enigma, the mystery of Bilam, who was given the gift of prophecy, but it led him only to greater degeneracy. And we've had an insight into the dangers of talent and intellect and the things that we value, and yet we see the danger of it, the danger of excess, the danger of excessive chesed. And Hashem, so to speak, was doing an act of chesed by not getting angry and not giving Bilam the chance to exploit the anger. But unfortunately, even in such a scenario, like it says in Bereshis, the petach chatas rovetz, sin crouches at the door. And therefore, one has to be continuously on guard to get the balance right between chesed and gvura, and to recognize that to veer to one extreme or the other extreme can bring peril in its wake. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that when we hear Parshas Balak this Shabbos, you'll think of some of our comments along the way tonight. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.